Well, welcome everyone. First off, thank you, Sarah, for joining us. Sarah Forsythe is a licensed professional that has both credentials out of Chicago, Illinois, and she's graced us with her presence today just to share some of her experience and observations for both just how she's uh, been able to put together both sides of the house when it comes to knowledge and approaches, interventions, all the way to considerations with branding in her business. So that'll be a lot of our conversation today, is just learning from Sarah and how she's managed to put those things together in a way that makes sense for her today. So without further ado, Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
To kick things off, I'll start with probably the cliche overarching question, but what's your approach to things today? We'll go back over the course of the conversation on probably how you first started to now, but how do you view your work today when it comes to your approach to your clients?
Yeah. I love that question because then I get to talk about kind of my favorite things and how I view and like what kind of like my personal philosophy, working philosophy is that like as humans, we do perform in almost every aspect of our life, right? Whether that's like communications, relationships, our job performance, our sport performance, we can improve a lot of those things. So I love being able to work with the clients and athletes that I have the privilege to work with, and we are able to focus on anything and everything that they want to improve and hone in on, and not perfect because we're still human at the core, but how do we get better? How do we do that 1% better day after day? So that's kind of my approach that I've been working on the past, I guess, 4 years in my private practice. So
Yeah. When did that thought process, as you're talking, I was thinking about this, when did that kind of dawn on you, the idea of like, we're always performing at something? I know your website speaks to that pretty clearly. But was that a concept that you were thinking about in school, or did it take some time? Like, when was that moment for you?
yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly what moment that was. It was definitely not in school. It was
Yeah.
probably the past couple of years
Yeah.
after I've had a lot of experience working with the clientele that I've been working with. Because we don't just focus on their sport or what they do for like their craft. Uh, we focus on the whole person, and so that involves a lot more things than just what they do.
So now you got me thinking about another question here. And by the way, this is so for those listening, I had sent some initial questions out to Sarah to kind of guide the conversation. But of course, this is what happens, right? When we start talking, I get other ideas. And those of you who don't know me that well yet, I can be a squirrel with this, so bear with the interview. But um, the idea of a whole person, though, was that influence from counseling, or is that just maybe a perspective you've always valued?
I think that was taught in school. So that
Okay.
base, that kind of foundation came from, okay, treating the person holistically and being able to use counseling skills and theories like that to be able to make sure that whatever the person wants to work on, we're able to work on, right? But then there's always things that might affect what we're working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So say they are an athlete and they're working on their baseball performance, but they had an argument with a friend or family member before their game or competition, that can affect a person, right? And
Yeah.
so being able to have conversations about that, being able to use the skills not only in their athletic performance, but within their whole life. That's something that has just become more and more evident and more important as I continue on with my career.
Yeah. And I want to circle back to that process with clients too, in a little bit, but how has that also influenced how you present yourself? So like if a parent is reaching out or you're talking to a coach, and also real quick, just as a caveat, um, when it comes to the client groups you're working on, is it majority individuals these days? Is it a combination? Who's the majority of the in terms of who is the client for you today?
Yeah, so I do work with a lot of individual clients, and I still have a wide spectrum of like athletes and non-athlete
Yeah.
performers in my caseload. I do have some small teams that I'm working with, so I'm within both business and sport.
Yeah.
So I'm still not specialized in one
Okay.
sport or, or one side of the house, still loving and doing everything.
Awesome. So then that helps. I just wanted to clarify that
Mhm.
before when we start going through some examples for those listening. So kind of circling back to the question then with the idea of how you present yourself, knowing that this is important, the holistic part, everyone kind of has performances, how we define them might look different. Um, how has that influenced how you introduce yourself to a client?
Yeah, so it can be tricky because it depends on what they're reaching out for, right?
Okay.
If it might be something that's more clinical focused versus something that might be more performance focused. Um, yeah, so it depends on that. And so I had written out like my perspective and how I interact with them changes a little bit. When I'm working with more clinical folks, I'm more kind of softer in my
Yeah.
approach and things like that. Versus if it's more strictly performance, I'm able to be a little bit more upfront in my challenging, and being a lot more solution focused and a lot more kind of collaborative. Um, and so it just depends on what they're looking for.
Yeah, interesting. So you spoke to the personality piece of it, like
Mhm.
engaging with them. I didn't even think about that. So personality considerations, you found a difference in
Yeah.
your approach.
Yeah.
When it comes to kind of your role with them or kind of how you're describing what you do, um, just in general, I guess
Yeah.
maybe in general, does that change, or have you just found that since your kind of version of consulting is redefining, performance, in that presentation of yourself, have you found that fairly consistent, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, I talk to people. I have like three pillars of my company. I have mental health, I have executive coaching, and I have sports psychology. And
Okay.
so I mean, I love doing sports psychology. So I say that I do sports psych. I'm a certified mental performance coach, and I also have my clinical license. So if there are clinical concerns, I'm able to address those and work with clients throughout that process as well. So that's kind of how I
Yeah,
talk about it. Yeah.
fair enough. When you're in front of a group or team, since you still do that a little bit, I know this
Mhm.
wasn't part of the initial line of questioning, but how do you like to present yourself to a group?
Yeah, so I do sports psych. It's very similar to how an athletic trainer or a strength coach works with an athlete's body. I work with their mind, and that kind of explains what I do, how I work, and it gives them, I think, a better picture of how that looks going
Sure.
forward.
So you like to have the comparisons with other roles that they're probably familiar with, just to kind of help conceptualize that when you're with team. Fair enough.
Absolutely, especially if they've never even heard what sports psych is. It's a very quick and easy way to get everyone on the same page.
Um, so now that you're here today, how have things changed for you? So when you first left school, how were some of the things you were kind of thinking about, and how has that evolved to where you're at today?
Yeah, when I graduated, I was really focused on securing and finishing my full clinical license. So at that point, I was LPC. I still need to do X amount of hours, a lot more supervision, take another exam, and then be able to become LCPC, which is licensed clinical professional counselor. And so I focused on that for the first couple of years of my career. I still wanted to do sports psych, still was doing sports psych in the group private practice that I was in. And then I continued to hone that craft as well as being able to outreach with teams and coaches and individual clients.
Yeah. And in terms of like your actual knowledge within session, like what
Mhm.
you were using and what we were applying, how has that evolved?
I feel like I didn't know anything back
Right?
then. And I feel like I know a lot more, and I still feel like I don't know a whole lot more that I will be able to continue to grow and gain more experience and things like that. Um, I feel like focusing so much more on like the theories and like just being a good person in the sessions and just being there and validating and things like that. Just showing up authentically and genuinely was the main focus.
Yeah.
Getting those hours and getting those reps in. And now I'm able to kind of just be who I am, knowing that, okay, I've done a lot of work. I have a lot of experiences under my belt. And now, like, let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of like what we're really working with, doing different interventions. I come from heavily trained and educated in CBT, but now I'm really founded in ACT, which I absolutely
Okay.
love using and working with clients. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you were obviously initially trained in, not initially, you were trained in CBT. Um, how do you balance navigating multiple perspectives with a client then? How has that evolved for you after going from graduate school to now?
What do you mean multiple perspectives?
So like if you're using CBT,
Hmm.
but now you enjoy ACT, does that mean
Mhm.
you never touch CBT anymore? Or is it just how do you balance having all
Yeah.
this knowledge and knowing what to pick?
Yeah. I really do love ACT. So if I'm able to use ACT with a client, like, and if they're able to grasp that and those different techniques and skills, like, okay, we're going to go full force on that, being able to go through that process. I do use CBT and some DBT skills with clients, especially if they do have clinical concerns that are underlying. And obviously, every person is going to be different. If something doesn't work that's within ACT, I will go
Yeah.
dabble CBT and things like that.
Yeah. I'm going to get technical for a
Yeah.
second, just because I think there's a lot of listeners who will appreciate that. So, interventions, right? That's its own thing. But when you're trying to understand the client needs,
Hmm.
um, do those theories influence that process, or is that separate? Like, I'm just needing to make sure you and I are on the same page. We're putting a plan together, right? Like, I'm just getting to know what you need.
Hmm.
Does your theoretical orientations influence that part? And if so, how? Or how do you balance that? Because
Yeah,
you have these different options you can apply after.
definitely, definitely. It there's hmm, all the above.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I'm talking with a person, and let's say I'm doing that 15-minute like consultation, and we're talking about like what they're experiencing, what they want to work on, I always like to talk about like what has worked, what hasn't worked for them in the past, to gauge like their readiness to change, the
Hmm.
things that they're willing to try, and figuring out, okay, how determined are they to changing and making some tweaks or adjustments in their life. And so as they're talking through that, I'm like, ooh, okay, so they're focused on this. Okay, they might have this concern. All right, so then I already know what potential skills to talk with them and or talk through them and teach them and things like
Yeah.
that. Um, so it's kind of like, okay, whatever they're giving to me, okay, what things in my toolbox do I have that could potentially help them? I'm not sure if I filter or like prioritize a different approach or foundation, but I'm able to then kind of pick and choose. And if something doesn't work, we can move on to something else.
Yeah, and the reason I'm also asking that is because I know for myself, we all kind of have our journey on that as we gain more experience. To this day, there's still times I assess needs from a cognitive perspective, because
Yeah.
it's like, ooh, I'm hearing all these thoughts and beliefs, but then
Mhm.
um, that's just how I'm understanding their situation. But then um, the education and the training afterward might be its own thing, because they don't always necessarily need to know how I'm organizing the info.
Right.
Um, but that's just some things that have kind of evolved over time as well. And for you in particular, you have an additional depth of knowledge because of your counseling background. So that's why I was really interested in also asking on behalf of those who are trying to balance both, um, if those are influencing that just needs assessment piece, like just where are you at, what do we need to work on,
Yeah.
or is that just something that kind of comes in after? and everyone's kind of got a different way of balancing that. And so I was just curious on how that process went.
Yeah, and I feel like it might be pervasive at this point. And so like there's a lot of clients that I have long-standing relationships with that have come in initially for clinical concerns, anxiety, depression, mood disorders, things like that. Um, Working with them long term, we're able to really manage a lot of those symptoms and things that they might be experiencing that are just not so fun.
Yeah.
Right. But then we're able to maybe shift focus and look at other things in their life that they want to improve or just adjust or tweak.
Yeah. And last part on kind of process here, and then we'll kind of come back out to more general things. Um, when it comes to how you monitor and support things, so you get to know them, you got different perspectives. You've mentioned ACT as a prominent one now. When it comes to the monitoring support, does that change if it's counseling versus just mental performance, or is that process pretty similar? You're still kind of monitoring things, and that doesn't change that much. Curious
Yeah,
if there's a difference here for you.
definitely monitoring, doing some checks and doing some quick assessments, whether it's like the GAD or the PHQ-9, like using some of those things to make sure that we're staying on the track that we want to. Obviously, if things pop up, and we can always like put more of like the performance pieces on pause, making sure that they, as a whole person, are being able to manage themselves and function as a great person. um, but yeah, I mean, life's always going to throw wrenches here and there. And so it's figuring out how to manage it, utilizing the tools that we've worked on in the past and being able to go forward with those things.
And so, with that now, kind of taking a step out or step back, when it comes to the services themselves, you mentioned three pillars in your company. How do you differentiate? Um, it sounds like you differentiate. So how do you differentiate the um, mental performance from counseling, especially if there might be some overlap from maybe some theories and applications perspective, but they're different to you. So how do you differentiate the two when you're describing what you do to others?
Yeah, I guess it's more of like how that person is able to function and go throughout their day or week, right? What are some of the concerns? What are some of those obstacles or challenges that they are faced with? Um, because those with clinical concerns might have more obstacles and challenges that someone who doesn't have clinical concerns and we're just focused on like sport performance or work performance. And so that kind of, I don't know if you want to call it care or just like more checking in and more just like having that intention behind doing the clinical skills and being there, um, versus just okay, we're gonna get after it. We're gonna just dive into it for the performance pieces.
And so it's funny you mentioned the spectrum because that's something that we've talked about. And for those listening, this is just something you got to think about. Right now, the AST form that's got the spectrum on there kind of talks about low functioning to high functioning.
Mhm.
And that's clearly led from probably more of a clinical perspective. Um, but I think it is important to just have a way to distinguish. I don't think any one way is perfect. I think Sarah is another example, right, of how we can distinguish that if we're offering both. And for
Mhm.
those that aren't duly credentialed, just having a clear definition of what that could look like uh, can just help with some of the differences. But I think you do need to have um, a definition of clinical mental health counseling and mental performance,
Mhm.
like Sarah's demonstrated here. just to help differentiate. So if you are duly credentialed and you want to offer multiple services, it's just a little bit more digestible to a client to understand, whether that's a parent or a coach, or you're not, and you're trying to distinguish your value amongst someone who is a licensed mental health provider. So just some things to consider as you're listening to this. So with that as well, kind of opens up back to your brand.
Mhm.
So with everything being a performance, so to speak, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, um, you have distinct service differences, right?
Mhm.
Descriptions. Um, you have multiple theoretical perspectives of knowledge that you're able to pull on as you need. And you have a holistic brand overall. Let's support the whole person.
Mhm.
Um, how do you see that continuing as you go forward? How do you see that evolving or um, helping you continue to move forward as you continue to organize your approaches, if that makes sense? I'm probably asking too many questions, but you have an overall philosophy and brand, and
Mhm.
that's influenced how you approach your work. And you have three concrete pillars.
Mhm.
You have the skill set and knowledge and credentials to address the full spectrum of mental health and performance. You've chosen to differentiate those services under a brand of holistic support. And so coming back to that question, how do you see yourself continuing this as you go forward?
Yeah, I love that question. It's a great question. Uh, it's going to start to kind of separate in a sense. So I'm going to kind of take the clinical side, take the counseling side, and make it its own like thing. And
Okay.
then keeping the performance with sports psychology and executive coaching under what you see on my website right now, right? Because when you go to my website, you don't really see a clinical counseling
Yeah.
website.
Yeah.
You see a very sport heavy, a very kind of black and red heavy website, which you don't typically see on a clinical counseling website. It's more of like softer tones,
Yeah.
pastels, like lighter. And so I want to differentiate those. So folks who come in and see different services, they are not getting confused either. And so being able to provide the things that they need and knowing that we can address and help and support with any of the stuff that they might have going on.
And so this is an interesting connection because you've gained experience, you've had these processes, you've had these experiences,
Mhm.
you developed an initial conception of your business.
Mhm.
Um, but the business is an extension of your work, like how you work with people. And I think that's also something worth noting, although this is not a direct business conversation today. Your beliefs, your philosophy influences will be influenced by what you're doing with your clients. And once you gain enough experience, that's going to strengthen and it's going to change how you're presenting yourself out to the public. In this case, your website.
Mhm.
Um, Probably too much unnecessary context there. But why the change? I'm so curious. I know you want to differentiate. What are you seeing, or what's been your learning curve here to say, all right, it's time to go ahead and separate these a little bit more fully?
Yeah. Because I still really value and I still really enjoy the clinical piece. Um, I have seen a downtick in folks reaching out for clinical concerns because I don't think my current website services or kind of promotes that. Being able to have a different kind of landing page, if you will,
Yeah,
that offers that just what people are looking for clinical counseling or anxiety or depression, things like that. Uh, I want to be able to give that to them. And of course, I want to scale. So I want to be able to have other mental, like health clinical people within that kind of umbrella, within that company. And then being able to hire more sports psych and performance psych people and being able to have that under that umbrella, if that makes sense.
100%. So I, of course, have um, one more question for you in regards to this, and then I have a summary comment for the group. Um, Although you're separating it more cleanly, which I think makes a ton of sense, right?
Yeah.
You're seeing that there's a disconnect right now with people wanting mental health because we know mental health is wanted, but
Mhm.
you're seeing a downtick. But you also mentioned something that's really interesting. There's two parts to this. Um, but the main part I just want to touch on first and ask you a question is you're also trying to make sure that there's no confusion on what you do to your intended audience.
Correct.
And that's something that I'll make a summary point on after, but I just wanted to highlight that since you mentioned it. It's brilliant, makes sense. Because it's shifting less away from what I know and who needs my help. And I'm trying to make that direct tie so that way there's less roadblocks to people accessing me for what I do. So I love that. But here's my question: so you're separating these things. Does it change your overall philosophy, or is your philosophy still the same though on what you believe as it relates to um, holistic support and the idea of um, you redefining performance, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Um, where I sit right now, and so this might change in the future with more knowledge and experience and whatever. But I still want, and I still really believe that like can improve any of our performances, mental health performance, sleep performance, nutrition performance, right? All of these different types of things. And if that falls under the category of mental health and clinical counseling, then that does. So from right now where I'm sitting, I do still believe in that philosophy.
Love that. And you just teed it up really, really nicely. And here's why I'm saying that. All of us will, if you haven't, you will. And for those that do, this probably resonates already. We are going to have a very strong philosophy on how we view our work. And that will influence the services we provide.
Mhm.
That's part one. What's great about this, though, is that this is a great example of how your philosophy has influenced your development of these three core pillars.
Mhm.
I believe in holistic approach, period. I'm calling it redefining performance um, as one of the landing pages now that
Yep.
I know your evolution of where you're going. But I believe in a holistic approach, and I have three core pillars
Mhm.
because if I'm going to do holistic work to support people, and now I have this credentialing, I can do that. And here's
Mhm.
how I do that. Here's clearly defined ways in which I can support a holistic approach. Now, here's the business savvy and the presentation. Even for those who aren't going into entrepreneurship or running a business, this approach still applies. Even if you're working for an organization, you're going to
Mhm.
have all these internal conversations. So it's the same principle, but I have to make sure this translates to my audience.
Mhm.
And that takes patience to observe what they're asking for because I have to translate it to what they need. And
Mhm.
so that's really cool. Your philosophy hasn't changed. You're just reorganizing uh, the delivery of it, through marketing, aka
Mhm.
your website page, to make sure that there's a better connection,
Mhm.
so that they know that I am doing these holistic things, even though it still may fall under the umbrella principle. I'm more focused on how I'm trying to communicate with the people I'm trying to help, and
Right.
so that's just something I want people to be aware of. Um, you still got to have a strong philosophy. If you don't, you're going to get caught up in the weeds, and marketing and outreach is going to get very complicated. But when you have a strong philosophy, it's going to only make it easier because you're going to deliver version 1.0 like you've already done, Sarah. And
Mhm.
now you can start delivering 2.0 and 3.0 because you're continuing to gain experience and getting savvier with how you want to present yourself. So I'm going to pause there because I saw you smirking. And so I just want to hand it over to you for additional comments and thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I was not expecting to be where I'm sitting when I graduated grad school. I was not expecting to sit here. I also really credit my upbringing. My parents own their own company, and so I went to trade shows. I went and I went to visit their like whenever they're going to any of the shows and things like that, and I saw them network. I saw them doing sales, and we did not take any type of sales class in grad school,
Yeah.
yet it is a huge part of private practice, and just being able to evangelize what we do within sports psych and performance psych. Um, and so I credit that. And yeah, I'm excited to continue to grow. I'm excited to see where this can lead and be able to continue to work as like mentoring other students, making sure that they're able to do the things that they want to do, so that they can be the best practitioner that they want to be as well. And so that's another piece of why I want to scale and grow and things like that.
Well, so there's as we wrap up today, two final things, and the first one's going to build directly off your story here. What advice would you give for those who are trying to figure this out? Are there some things that, as you mentioned, you just credited some experiences here for helping you out? Um, but for those kind of trying to balance it, do you have any advice? Are there any things that you would recommend that can help make it feel less daunting?
Yeah, that's a good question. uh, Being able to hone in your skills first, being able to make sure
Yeah,
that you're able to be a really great practitioner if you're on one side of the house or both. Figuring out what you want to do with those degrees, those licenses, those certifications, what type of clients you want to work with, having some of those answers can be
yeah,
helpful. Um, I get the privilege of being able to work with a whole bunch of different types of clients. And so that really continues to excite me because not
yeah,
any session or any day is the same. And so that keeps me jazzed up in this field and keeps me going. And once I want to continue to learn more and grow, and I know that's going to happen. So it just takes
yeah,
time. Being patient is a huge other thing because that's something I have to remind myself of. I get so excited to start doing the work that I feel like, okay, I still need to meet this person where they're at. I still need to do a lot of the psychoeducation piece around just what I do. I wish there would be a world one day that we just wake up and everyone knows what sports psych is and performance psych is, and the things that we do and how we can help. But until that day, it's continued talking and sharing and collaborating and networking and all that good stuff.
awesome. Yeah, I agree with you. I think for now, we have to be our own advocates for sure,
Yeah.
especially in a field that has so many options.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and lastly, if I remember right, probably about, I think maybe a year ago, you had mentioned you were supporting young professionals as well.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still running groups for, was it licensed or certified, or was it a combination? I know you were running some support courses, I believe, if I memory serves.
Yeah, and they were, I mean, it was mixed. There were some folks who had that were in clinical programs and some who were just focused in sport. I'm still doing that. We meet
Okay.
kind of monthly. Yeah.
And were you still, was it a course, or was it more of just kind of a meetup group? Just so I'm accurate with that, I just want to make sure that that's still, I'm presenting that correctly.
No, it's still right now a meetup group. I think the other thing that you're thinking of is my practice playbook. I want to,
That was it.
yeah, yeah. It's a 10-week course that I am finishing, completing, kind of on pause, finishing.
Yeah.
And it's going to help folks who want to enter into these like private practice entrepreneurship like environment, what to do, what are kind of like the nuts and bolts of a private practice, how to do it. Because again, we didn't really have classes in school to teach us
Yeah.
what to do or how to start. Yeah.
Awesome. Um, well, I will turn it over for any concluding thoughts for you. Anything that we didn't have a chance to talk about today that you wanted to mention for the group?
Let's see. Looking at some of my notes here. Um,
Otherwise, I do have one more question.
yeah.
We've talked a lot about those balancing dual licensure today and considerations. For those who are not licensed, especially when you think about what you know,
Mhm.
right, and the knowledge that you found the most helpful, any recommendation for those who might be coming from a non-counseling program or maybe not as experienced or not as they have as much access to that knowledge set? Any recommendations for them that would help them be a better mental performance consultant?
Yeah. Start growing your network of therapists and of clinical counselors, because if you start working with an athlete and you do notice that, okay, this is out of my competency, this is okay, trending more towards a clinical disorder, you're going to need to know really great therapists who can take on those clients. So start growing your network now. And then obviously that can lead to collaboration and knowledge sharing and everything like that. So you do kind of know what to look out for. Oh, if the client is saying XYZ, oh, shoot, okay, that might be like, what's the saying now? An orange flag or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um okay, that's something that's like a marker I need to touch on or I need to check in on. And if it hits a certain point or I feel like I'm out of scope or I'm not able to provide ethical work or ethical support, then I need to start to refer out. And that's the other thing I absolutely love about having both the clinical and performance side is I don't have to interrupt the working relationship that I have to be able to have someone else come in and step in and do some of the clinical pieces. But I also know that those who only are uh, based in like performance and don't have their clinical license, that they are really good at drawing the lines and having great boundaries and being able to have resources and networks and everything like that so that that client or that athlete is being able to be supported fully. So that's
So
my
okay, I one more, and then you're off the hook for today. Promise. But the idea of ethics and boundaries. So got a lot of people coming right out of school listening to this, and the idea of multiple hats is frowned upon. Now, you have distinct services, um, but I can only imagine there's going to be certain clients that are probably going to get a combo.
Mhm.
Um, do you view that as wearing multiple hats, or what does that really? What does that mean to you? Because you're providing a holistic support structure to clients. How do you view the idea of a multiple relationship or multiple hats from an ethics perspective? Is it? Um, is it not? What do you think? What's been your
Yeah.
observation doing the work when you're out there?
Yeah, I mean, definitely multiple hats. I mean, grant I wear 10 different hats in 1 hour with the admin in the building and all the other things that I do within my private practice. Um, but no, it's being able to figure out how to navigate this ethically. And I think there was someone who was, I think you talked about their research and the ethical decision tree to work and how to work with clients if you do have both or you don't, if you do have both clinical and sport certs and licenses, or if you don't. And I'm excited to see that decision tree because I don't think that there was a image for it quite yet. But being able to navigate and case consult and make sure that you are doing things ethically and in your like competency and in your scope of work. Um, for sure, it's definitely multiple hats and um, it's where consents come in and
Yeah.
making sure that you have open communication with the client and they understand what you're doing and you are on the same page and you continue to check in and make sure that all right, we're still good to go here.
Yeah, and I think what you hit there at the end, I think for those listening, is what you really got to think about. Because the client is going to come see you for support. You know, whether you're confusing them because you're helping them process a complex situation, or you're doing mental skills training. Um, that's not going to be the part that's the issue, because you're just a support. But I
Mhm.
think being honest with yourself on your competence, but I think procedurally, this is where you can really protect yourself. Very, very clear, informed consent,
Mhm.
constant communication and checking in to make sure that you're on the same page with what we're working on. So I'm just really glad you brought that out. Not that I was fishing for that. I just think sometimes it can be very difficult when trying to distinguish between a counseling session versus a mental performance session. Do you completely finish the counseling first before you go into mental performance? Everybody navigates different, but I think professionally, you provided some great points there for everyone to reflect on, so you can make that informed decision, so you can be ethical, and do right by the client. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Any final thoughts? Otherwise,
No,
you're out.
yeah, awesome.
Thank you, Sarah, for your thoughts today. I know this will be very helpful for those listening. Best of luck with your continued business, and I know we'll talk again soon, probably to pick your brain on some business practices for the entrepreneurs in the group. But thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. Great to be here.